Okay, so for the third section of this week's topic on gentrification, I'm going to look at what I'm calling class effects in the nighttime economy. This draws upon some research I've been doing with David Ferrugia and Julia Coffey, and Megan Sharp and Ros Gill and Lisa Atkins on a funded project that we're doing over the past kind of 4 or 5 years of young people working in the nighttime economy. The project was originally about how young people's very presence in bars and cafes and places like that are kind of wanted by the owners to, give it a particular look. Young people's tastes and their own kind of coolness or edginess are kind of enrolled then in the branding of the place in a way. They don't get paid for it, by the way. And so we're interested in how young people in the nighttime economy create value. The research then, and also the way that kind of gender and stuff like that plays out, we have a lot of really interesting research about how young women are the ones have to deal with violence in these places because apparently men won't hit women. I think we have some papers on that. Also then COVID happened, so it kind of shut down the project, so we're still doing this. The research I'm presenting here is about some bars in the inner north of Melbourne. And I want to talk about here is how class happens in these spaces. And the way class happens in these spaces is also very much part of how gentrification happens. So class here, it's important to think about, to be clear about when I'm talking about class. I'm talking about how class is made here in a particular place. I'm talking about class not as a static kind of determined category, but almost as a process. Because the people that we're talking about here, a young kind of 20-year-old that's moved to Melbourne that's kind of has relatively no money, but maybe a fair bit of cultural capital living in this area, working in a bar, as opposed to the high-vis working class dude that's in that pub that's being gentrified. They're probably actually quite close in class position in many ways. But it's not really necessarily the class identity of the individuals we're talking about here. We're talking about the way that kind of these social processes enact class and the feeling of class in particular places. So the bar workers here get their jobs mostly through word of mouth. They kind of laugh at us when we talk about, do you have any qualifications or did you go to TAFE? They go, that's not what you need to work in the hospitality industry. You need to know the right people. Many of the workers are doing these jobs on at least perceiving that they're going to do another career. They're supporting study, all that kind of stuff. We do have quite a big cohort in the study of what they end up calling themselves lifers. They kind of often started off in the hospital thing thinking they were just going to stay and do something else, and they stay there. We know whether that's they feel trapped or whether they made that choice. There's interesting things going on in there as well. In terms of the bars we're talking about here as well, the young people tend to really like these bars. They're working there because they're often places they would have went to anyway. So the illusio, that is the purpose and the meaning that people have to work in these places, there's obviously financial imperatives, but really they know they're there to create a good time and they like aspects of that. They get to sometimes perform their own politics, and particularly in the inner north, there's lefty kind of LGBTI nights and non-gendered bathrooms and art and music going on in these spaces. So again, the distinction between work and leisure is often blurred here. But it can never be fully blurred. Even if you're working in a great bar that you love, you've still got to clean up piss and vomit, and you've still got to deal with drunk idiots, and you've still got to get, pour out like multiple beers.
You'll still be there at 2 a.m. cleaning up when everyone else has gone and moved on.
Yeah. So this speaks to kind of some theories of labour that I'm not going to go into here about effective labour and emotional labour and immaterial labour, where young people's kind of very subjectivities, their whole lives are drawn into this workspace. They get to kind of be themselves, so that means there becomes this kind of alienating processes too, where often the things that they love in these spaces gets killed off by the fact that they're working in them. So I'm just going to talk about some interview data here. So as I said, the workers have real affinities with the place and often with the punters in there, but at the same time there's these forces of gentrification happening. Pubs get bought up, they want to kind of move the kind of more poorer consumers out. They want to have their 10 schooners of VB. They get rid of the VB, they put in the hipster beers that are now like $14 a pint. And this kind of thing, and this, what seems like consumer choices and about fairy beer actually has these kind of real effects on people's lives that have been there forever. So we asked Carly about this, and she's really reflexive about it. She talks about, the place doesn't want to bring in certain types, but we're economically freezing out, but she feels gross about it because people have been coming here for years and now they can no longer afford to drink there. I know that I'm part of that. I'm not in denial of that. So here you have Carly, who I think from memory was like a third year kind of University of Melbourne student, you know, she's probably studied some sociology. She understands what's going on, but she's there, right? What can she actually do about this? You know, she's moved to this area for all these good things, and now she knows she's part of this gentrification process in effect. Makes her feel uncomfortable, but she can also see why the owners and managers want to do it. They don't want people to come here that want to drink for cheap or free, you know. So the old codgers are moving out and the hipsters are moving in. So what's going on here? The workers feel really at home in these places. They talk about how they can be themselves. We had one worker that talks about how the pub that she was working in felt like a lounge room. She's so comfortable there. She was a manager of the place. She gets the run of the place. She allows people in. She kicks people out. Her friends come and drink there when she's on shift. She'll look after some of them and all that kind of stuff. This becomes, you know, his social life as well. But what always happens in these places is you have to deal with problems. And they talk about people as problems. And also they talk about people as dickheads. Problems and dickheads are terms that come up a lot. Now, a dickhead does tend to have more male connotations, but there's female connotations, examples of it as well. And what happens here when you have to deal with problems is you have to draw on your own understanding of the world and your own stereotypes in a way. So experienced bar staff learn how to scan a room and understand and think about who's going to be a problem. But then they're doing that often through markers of class and race and ethnicity that are stereotypes. So what's interesting too is that when these young people, particularly of more lefty backgrounds, often work in places where there's richer people there, they often describe these people as having less class. So less class isn't necessarily people below them in the class system, it can be people above them. They talk about, you know, the business suits that come in, this group of 8, and the boss has the credit card, and he's just a dickhead to everyone around him. He's kind of throwing his weight around and all that kind of stuff. Now, these people are above workers in class system, but they talk about having less class. So, you know, talking about the Chrysler brand of dickhead as opposed to the Datsun brand of dickhead. It's a picture of a Datsun 180B there. So, bar workers in this sense are phenomenologists. So for people that aren't familiar with that, phenomenology is a kind of way of doing research about being in the world, of understanding what's going on in certain situations, a kind of symbolic interactionist understanding of things. And good bar staff in particular learn to do this. They talk about how to see an alcoholic a mile off. Again, the quote from Greg here kind of goes through this kind of almost phenomenological analysis of what it's like to be a bar person. You can see people, they're very at ease and they're just here to kind of have fun. You can kind of tell that, like, if someone, you know, is kind of a defensive body language, all these things are indicated that you're not having a good time, you know. So, you know, you learn to do this stuff. Now, what they also talk about, though, is that if you're in a particular kind of place, let's call it a hipster bar, and someone comes in with, you know, the wrong sneakers and tracksuit pants and that kind of stuff, they instantly stand out and therefore draw more attention. That basically means, whether they're doing anything wrong or not, it increases the chances of them at some stage being kicked out. And for me, this is a really good example of how gentrification happens in specific moments. It's not just economic forces, it's not just people having to move away because of the prices going up. It's happening in these everyday moments as well. So, how do our young bar workers feel about this? Well, they're pragmatic about it. You know, they're doing a job. They're sometimes ambivalent about it. Sometimes they're actually disgusted by the people they have to kick out, and they kick them out for good reason, and they often, because they've been dickheads or violent or whatever. But there's often a kind of real level of guilt with what's going on here as well. They feel bad about it. Particularly, again, the ones that kind of have more leftist politics that kind of know they're enrolled in this gentrification process. So to conclude, the research is really like kind of showing really that, you know, young people's subjectivities, their very self, are really valuable in these spaces. And you can see how these things work, right? If you go to a kind of cafe or a bar that's working, the people working there fit the aesthetic. Everything feels right. There's an atmosphere and a vibe that everything's working. Often the punters then kind of fit the vibe as well, and it just all seems to happen. If the wrong people are in there, you can tell there's a kind of less fun, there's less kind of conviviality going on. So we talk about how this is kind of related to notions of effective, immaterial, emotional, and aesthetic labour. Again, I won't go into that much detail, but it's in the paper that's in the reading list. And again, the boundaries of work and leisure and labour and play here are really important. People are having fun at work, but that fun is sold to the consumer. That sexiness of the bar person is sold to the consumer. So again, young people's very existence in these places, they're not just getting paid in a way to pour the beers and clean up the vomit. They're being paid to look and do particular things. So also what we know is the young bar workers kind of know this as well. So young women know sometimes that they're, put in front of the house if they're good looking, they're there to attract the men. They know, if they're in a bar that's kind of trying to get rid of the wrong people, that they're part of this gentrification process. But really, what else choices do they have if they're trying to live in this area and get by? So class emerges relationally in these kind of banal everyday interactions. And these affective relations, they range from different intensities, from fun to kind of, fear. And from, mundane everyday things of like, serving someone the wrong beer and having some weird chat about taste to like getting in some violent confrontation. These things are kind of the way that class happens in these spaces. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it there.